All right, everyone. Today we are going to tackle one of the biggest, most complicated challenges facing the entire global economy, this absolute mountain of debt that is, quite frankly, reshaping our world.
And this is a great place to start, because we're not just looking at numbers on a page here. What we're really talking about is this massive, growing debt chasm that's threatening to destabilize, well, everything.
And this is not a metaphor. I mean, look at this number. Global public debt is on a path to shoot past 100% of global GDP by 2028. Just think about that. That is a level we have never, ever seen before in peacetime. It's a real turning point.
So, the big questions are, how on earth did we get here? And more importantly, what can we possibly do about it? So today, here's our game plan. First, we're going to diagnose the really deep connection between inequality and debt. Then, we'll see how this whole mess is playing out differently across the world. And finally, we'll look at the tough paths to fiscal discipline and the huge challenges we face today.
Okay, let's get right into the diagnosis, because I'll bet it's not what you think. See, the root cause of this debt explosion isn't just, government spending too much. It's something much deeper, a structural imbalance in our economies that's being driven by extreme inequality.
It all starts with this concept that economists call the savings glut, which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's an idea that was actually first flagged way back during the Great Depression, and believe me, it is more relevant today than ever before. So here's how it works. It's actually pretty simple. When way too much income gets concentrated with the very wealthiest people, they end up saving way more money than they could ever possibly spend or even invest in productive things. I mean, there are only so many yachts you can buy, right?
So this giant ocean of excess savings, it effectively sucks purchasing power out of the rest of the economy. If most people aren't seeing their paychecks get bigger, then overall consumer demand just gets weaker and weaker.
But here is the catch. An economy needs demand to grow. It's the fuel. So to keep the whole machine from grinding to a halt, that demand gap has to be filled somehow. And if it's not coming from people's wages, there's really only one other option: debt.
So this leads us to the absolute crucial point. We have to understand who is taking on all of this debt, because the answer to that question has changed dramatically over the last couple of decades.
And this slide tells a fascinating story. Before the 2008 financial crisis, all those excess savings from the rich were basically absorbed by regular households taking on bigger mortgages and more credit card debt. But then the crash happened, and that entire private credit system just imploded. And to stop a full-blown economic meltdown, the job of creating demand shifted right onto the public sector, onto governments.
And what this creates is a really fragile system that we call indebted demand. It basically means our economic growth isn't organic. It's not self-sustaining. It fundamentally depends on a constant IV drip of new borrowing. And that, my friends, is a super unstable way to run an economy. Now, this systemic weakness, it doesn't look the same everywhere you go. It shows up in very different ways around the world, creating what's really a tale of two very distinct crises, especially when you compare the advanced economies with nations in sub-Saharan Africa.
This table does a fantastic job of highlighting the key differences. In advanced economies, the problem is mostly these huge public deficits, which leads to this long-term, slow-burn, unsustainable debt path. But in sub-Saharan Africa, the risk is much more immediate. They've shifted to borrowing from their own domestic markets, which creates a huge rollover risk, meaning they constantly have to find new lenders, and this dangerous sovereign bank nexus, which we'll get to in a second.
And this is the real danger. It doesn't matter if the problem is a long-term one or a short-term one. The breaking point, it can arrive with terrifying speed, and it almost always catches everyone completely by surprise.
So in a lot of developing economies, especially in Africa, a huge concern is this sovereign bank nexus. Think of it as a doom loop. It's a dangerous feedback cycle where local banks own so much government debt that if the government gets into trouble, it can instantly trigger a massive banking crisis.
So, okay, we've got the diagnosis. We see the complications. What's the prescription? Let's focus on what the advanced economies, the ones really at the center of this whole savings glut, what they have to do to get their own houses in order.
Look, the solution is a tough, three-pronged approach. There are no magic bullets here. It's not just about cutting spending. It's about deep, structural reforms to actually boost growth, finally tackling long-term issues like pensions, and totally overhauling tax systems to raise money more effectively.
And we know this can actually work. You just have to look at the countries that were at the very center of the euro area debt crisis. They were forced by the markets to make exactly these kinds of painful, difficult changes,
Now, let's be clear. The adjustment process was incredibly painful for their citizens. No question about it. But the data is clear. It ultimately put them on a path to stronger growth and much more stable finances. The lesson is pretty stark. That kind of discipline, it does pay off, eventually.
But you know, a good prescription is totally useless if the patient can't or just won't take the medicine. And that brings us to the final and maybe the biggest challenge of all, the global environment itself. In the world we live in today, things are just so much more complicated. We have unstable geopolitics creating supply shocks, new pressures for defense spending, and all of this is making the international cooperation we need to solve these problems harder than it's ever been.
And this quote, this just brings it all home. No single country can fix this problem by itself. A stable global economy is a public good. It benefits everyone, and everyone has a responsibility to help maintain it.
And so, that leaves us with this one critical question. We can see the path to stability. We know it requires economic discipline and serious reform. But finding the incredible political will and the global coordination to actually walk that path, that is the real challenge. And the answer is going to define all of our prosperity for generations to come.